Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Ludmila Yamalova. Today is slightly a different format. I have here in the studio with me a Dubai school student who is an aspiring lawyer, and she wanted to speak with me about how I became a lawyer and about my journey as a lawyer. Hello, welcome to my studio.
Hi, Mom. Good afternoon. How are you today?
Hello, Sheryl. It's good to meet you.
Good to meet you too, Mom.
And so, how did my profile come?
Idea was to interview someone who is in the field of your interest. Now, I want to become a lawyer, so I wanted to interview someone who is a lawyer. And the first person that came to my mind as soon as when I thought lawyer was you. And I remember running to one of my classmates and saying, "Do you remember the one lawyer that we see on TikTok who shares advices and she's walking around her office?" She's like, "No." And then I went home that night and I searched up your profile as soon as I could. And I was like, I'm going to be interviewing her for sure.
Well, very good. Okay, well, let's start then.
Like I said, I've been following your work for a little while now and gives me immense happiness to be able to meet with you today.
Okay, so now tell me why you're so happy and why have you been following my work?
On the internet, there's not much that you can actually go through and learn. And it's mostly about the world, but like what you talk about is basically specific to UAE. You talk about UAE law, you talk about real estate, you give legal advices. So for a reason, it really intrigues me. I like learning more about, and it feels nice having that knowledge within me.
Well, that's interesting, and that's sort of why I wanted to start with this, perhaps because the idea of doing this kind of legal advice through this social media format, perhaps was more originally tailored for those people who would actually benefit from this advice,
Right.
i.e., people who perhaps could not afford to pay for legal advice, people who don't know how to get information. But it's people perhaps who actually have certain legal issues that they want to be able to address, and so these kind of snippets of legal advice were targeted more for them. But it's interesting to see that actually high school students and other types of students are also listening and watching this kind of content and learning from it.
Let's talk about your job. You're a lawyer, so what made you want to become a lawyer? How did you decide that, I want to work in law?
So it's perhaps not what other lawyers will tell you, or perhaps their own journey. I did not know what I wanted to do. In general, I was told by many that you should be a lawyer. I didn't really understand what that really meant, what it meant to be a lawyer, what it meant to be in the legal field. So I personally did not have it in me, and I didn't grow up thinking, breathing, smelling law. I was just in fact, I wanted to work at a circus, believe it or not. And then I wanted to live in Africa and work with animals, just to give some ideas of what I dreamt of when I was younger. But kind of throughout my life, people would say, "Well, you would make a good lawyer. You should study law." But it wasn't anything that I could really, in practical terms, understand what that meant. And so I finished high school in Ukraine and moved to the U.S. And in the U.S., the way the academic program works is that you go to the university, which is your 4 to 5 year program, and that's called the undergraduate program. In the U.S., the undergraduate program does not have law, nor was I even interested in law at the time. And generally speaking, in the U.S., I guess high school students or those who are applying for universities, they just apply without really have a focus of a specific industry, a specific discipline. There are obviously exceptions, but perhaps most of them are exceptions. So they just go to university and then they figure out what they want to study at the university. So that was me. Okay. But I ended up studying political philosophy and then doing more philosophy at the university. But in the U.S., the undergraduate degree, which is the university degree, does not offer law. So in the U.S., law isn't a graduate program. So it didn't even factor into my vocabulary. So that kind of perhaps worked, time-wise, worked for me, and my development-wise, it worked for me because I certainly was not thinking of law as just kind of going with emotion. So I went to the university, as majority of high school kids in the U.S. do, and ended up studying political philosophy. Then I went and I worked in Silicon Valley in management consultancy for a few years. But that was, I always knew I would go to a graduate program. Okay. What that graduate program was going to be, I didn't have no clue. But sort of I always remember, and people kept telling me, "Well, you should be a lawyer. You should go to law school." And so as I was doing my management consultancy, I knew it was a temporary journey until I decide what I'm going to study next. And I think as I was going through the motions, I thought maybe business school because I was in management consultancy. There's a lot of MBA colleagues in my circle of friends at the time. But it didn't really appeal to me. I knew through this management consultancy period that I did not want to go to business school. So I was left with not that many choices. So law school it was. So I applied law school. I got into law school, and I to tell you even more. And I thought, hey, having legal degree or law degree would help me ultimately to become a diplomat. And I thought maybe I could teach at the university. That was also one of the later in life, those who were kind of my ambition. So it was between diplomacy and academia. And so then I graduated from law school in the US. Law school is 3 years, it's additional 3 years. And then you graduate with a degree in doctorate of jurisprudence. So it's a doctorate degree.
Okay.
Then you do that, you graduate from that, and then you have to, again, you're still not a lawyer in the US. Then you have to pass the bar exam. So I was licensed in California, and it's a 3-day exam.
Okay.
And only then, once you pass that exam,
Yes,
there's
you're
a number of other. It's not quite. There's still a few some due diligence. There's some criminal record checks go on, and then you finally go and you get sworn to the bar, and that's when you now are official a lawyer. So that's a fairly long journey. And so I started working. My first job was in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and I remember I started my first day, and I started counting the number of years from there on that I was going to leave law and do something else. So I was not really going to be a lawyer, even as I started working at a law firm. I still did not really want to be a lawyer long term. But then one thing led to another. I had a very interesting experience working at DLN in-house. And so it really was a gradual realization, evolution into becoming actually a passionate lawyer. But that was really more of a self-discovery along the way.
So, as a lawyer, do you go to courts?
Yes, let me kind of perhaps introduce the concept of legal practitioners, the differences of
Yes.
lawyers in different countries. So in the US, we only have one type of lawyer. So the lawyers in the US are called attorneys, and this is because it takes so long to get a law degree. You go to the university for 4 to 5 years, then you go to law school for maybe 3 years, then you get the bar, you pass the bar, if you pass the bar. And where I took the bar in California, it's only 40% passing rate. So by the time you actually have the law degree, so we're all with the right of audience, so to speak. In other words, we're all litigators and full-fledged lawyers. So that's that concept. That's the concept of lawyers that exists in the U.S. In the U.K., for example, you have solicitors and you have barristers. So barristers are the ones who actually go to court, and solicitors do not have the right to go to court. We don't have that difference. In the U.S., we're all basically barristers / solicitors. So as a U.S. lawyer, therefore, yes, I have the right to go to court, and since I'm admitted in practice in California, so I have the right to appear before California courts. When I moved to the UAE, so I'm in the UAE in Dubai in particular, I'm admitted on the basis of my California qualifications. So, and then here I am registered with the DIFC courts. I'm not sure if you've heard, but the DIFC, it's the Dubai International Financial Center. They have their own courts, and these courts are based more on English law and they're common law courts. So I'm admitted to practice law before those courts, in addition to the U.S. courts. I'm also admitted to practice before the DFC courts, and then all other sort of common law courts like ADGM, for example. Also, I'm able to practice there as well. And I'm also a registered arbitrator at the Dubai International Arbitration Center, so DIAC arbitrator. So it's a form of lawyering, if you will. So in short, so these are the kind of perhaps the courts where I have the right of audience personally, but as a firm, we also do a lot of legal work and court work with the local courts, not directly, so to speak, because we're not local advocates, but we do work very closely with our partner local advocates, and therefore we do a lot of work with the courts.
How long have you been practicing law?
So I became a lawyer in 2002, so that would be 21 years. This is on the 22nd year.
Oh,
So that's, yes, but I know I look like I'm 22, but I've actually been practicing law for 22 years. So yeah, so law officially 22 years, but uh, I started as an intern before I graduated from law school because in the U.S., as I explained, our law degree is 3 years, and then every summer, law students, are encouraged to also intern at law firms. So every summer during my law degree, my law school, I was also interning. So I started practicing law as an intern.
now, let's talk about your journey. Now, you are a TikToker. Now, as a TikToker who posts on, you're a lawyer and you post on TikTok. What made you want to post on social media?
Well, it's an interesting question. The sequence of your question is an interesting one, given your previous question about my age, because if you could calculate very quickly my age, perhaps you would know that social media is a different generation. It's a different era. I come from the dinosaur era. And so the TikTok is truly, perhaps it's more your generation, not mine. I didn't even really know what TikTok was. So TikTok was a language was not part of my vocabulary, and but I do remember I had an intern here from NYU University, a very vibrant young man, and he was on TikTok, and he was very artistic and very social and creative and kind of fun. And I remember at some point I was introduced to the idea of TikTok through him. So he would post various things on TikTok. So my first impression of TikTok, as the little I knew, it was more for your generation, for the sort of the dancing and the singing and the partying. So that's all I knew, and it was a very small little snippet of kind of in the back of my mind that I heard somebody mention TikTok, and I thought it was for high school students basically doing that kind of a fun thing. So that was that, and then I had heard from Instagram. A few people told me I should go to Instagram, and like this is Facebook is there. I can barely manage that, and so and then COVID happened.
Yeah.
And COVID was a bit of a wake up call to all of us. Before COVID, it was we were fairly privileged position as a law firm. We did not really have to market. I've been in the UAE for a number of years now. It's 15 years, and I've been practicing in the same place and doing the same thing for 15 years. And if you've seen since you work here in our office, I've been in this office for 15 years. So I'm really one of those old fashioned. And this is not very typical of the UAE. You know, most people move around a lot here and try out different jobs. And I've been doing the same thing for the last 15 years. And at the end of the day, it's a small town. So we've been kind of, until COVID came, we were fortunate enough not to have to advertise. Plus, I've been doing Dubai Eye Radio for 15 years as well. And that gave me exposure. Well, when COVID happened, our world as we knew it kind of flipped upside down, and it was no longer the previous connections, and using the word that you mentioned earlier, were not working the same way for us. And a lot of the clients that we had before, by virtue of the changes, the sort of fundamental changes in the economy due to COVID, had to basically leave the market. And so we needed to reinvent ourselves. We needed to figure out a different way to communicate with the world and sort of restructure our business and capture a different, perhaps even type of audience. So again, being my generation, I try to be open-minded, but I'm still cannot change the fact that I am of a certain age. So I thankfully I have a number of younger colleagues, and the woman who runs our office, Adriana, so she said, we need to hire a marketing person, a full-time marketing person who has a social media experience. I was like, well, we had to do something different. So I had to take a leap of faith and said, okay, I think I can see now, because as you recall from COVID time, we were all living off of our basically devices. That was our world. And it became that much more evident, the power of social media and staying in touch via technology. So it sort of made sense when Adriana offered the idea. I said, it made sense. And so we started looking for someone with that experience. And that in itself was all very new to us, because we had never even had to market ourselves, let alone actually find somebody with a marketing background, let alone somebody who actually knows their social media. And we interviewed a number of people, and then finally we interviewed Sumaya. And I will never forget Sumaya, what she said in her interview. She said, "I will make you famous." And that kind of put me back. But she said it with a love. She was very grounded, but very confident at the same time in her ability. So I just felt in her voice and the way she presented that she meant it. I didn't know how, because it seemed a little bit out of this world. And she said one of the craziest things. She said, "I'll put you on TikTok." I almost fell off my chair because, as I said earlier, to me, TikTok at the time this is the medium for high school students, yes, dancing and doing that. So she said, "I'll put you on TikTok and I'll make you famous." And well, I thought she was crazy, but I thought, listen, I don't want to be the dinosaur. I don't want to be frozen in the previous era and ice age. I want to keep up with the times. I'm going to give it a leap of faith and give it a try. So we hired Sumaya, and I thought, listen, she's young. This is her thing. If we hired her for this role, we'll let her fly with it. Let's give her air. Let's give her freedom to do what she thinks may work for us, and I'll just follow. So I became a follower, and she put me on TikTok. And I remember, oh my God, the first time she put me on TikTok, the number of times we recorded the same video. I'm in horror still today watching my first videos. It was so stiff. Oh my gosh, and I remember how many times we had to record that video. And I remember she posted the first video, and she wrote to me, "Oh my God, it's trending, it's trending." I didn't know what trending was. So that's also terminology is a lot I had to learn. And so I guess the first video started trending. You would know what that means. So that was the kind of beginning of where we are now.
It's really remarkable. I mean, the way you interact, the way you are on no camera, you're so loose, you're so dynamic.
It wasn't like that. It did not start that way, trust me.
But the progress over time is truly remarkable.
Thank you.
So now let's talk a little bit about your journey. Now, how has your journey been talking and sharing legal advices to people across the UAE?
So that actually is something perhaps which is why Sumaya's idea and my skills, I'd like to think, have sort of merged well and worked, because I enjoy what I do as a practitioner, and very much enjoy what I do, and I enjoy the intellectual challenge of it and the intellectual rigor. As I mentioned earlier, I've been doing law in the UAE for a very long time, so I have a lot of knowledge base. I have a lot of content in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
So, and for years, I've had all these experiences and interesting stories and interesting cases and memos and articles I've written. And my frustration had always been, I have so much knowledge collectively, not just in here, this head, but cumulative as a firm, as a practice. But we're not really utilizing all that content in the most efficient way. Every time it just kind of gets sort of stored somewhere on the server and in some kind of a book in the binder, but we're not really capitalizing on all the content that we have. We've created this very valuable content in a way that would basically help the masses, and we have it already. But we find I don't want you to mistake. This is not a charity. We're not a nonprofit. We are basically everything you see here in our office. We have to earn it. Yeah. So we need to charge for our service. We cannot just give out free service. That being said, we have a lot of content that's available already here, and so there's a way to capitalize on what we have, and then even if we don't make money on it directly, indirectly, we figured this would benefit a lot of people in the very least. So we had a lot of content, and now with the social media medium, it just seemed that, okay, now we have an opportunity to start using all this content that we're creating, all this sort of wealth of knowledge, all the library of knowledge, and start sort of giving it out. Because once you do one video, then, as you know, it's out there, and that people can share, and all of a sudden you've capitalized on this bit of information. So that was one. So we had the wealth of knowledge. But two, it's interesting, TikTok kind of forced us into this format of these one minute videos, because at the time in particular, that was all you could do.
Yes,
so, and as a lawyer, you can't just make statements, because even if you're saying, hey, listen, I'm not here giving you your personalized legal advice. If you're a lawyer, as a lawyer speaking, people will rely on what you say. So you have to be very careful about what you say. So here you have these several factors. One, you want to share certain content that is legal content. You also want to back it up, because just saying something is illegal, okay, well, it may not be very helpful to somebody who wants to rely on information, because they want to, why is it illegal? Where does it say that it's illegal?
Yeah.
So if you notice, most of my content always has a legal reference. So now being able to squeeze that the concept itself with the legal reference into 1 minute format was is not very easy to do. And in fact, as a very long time ago, an oldest the U.S. Supreme Court justice said, if I had more time, I would write you a shorter letter. Think about it, and that's truly that. So to do a 1 minute snippet of the video actually takes hours to prepare. So that's basically, but collectively, because as a group here, we're all very much interested in law and in different cases and jurisprudence, and we're all very passionate, and so therefore we have a lot of cases and stories we want to share, and we know people need that kind of information. So then that's basically kind of what motivated us. Okay, let's now parse out all this different knowledge that we have and figure out a way to present it in these bite-size type videos and put them out there. But trust me, every one of these very short little videos takes hours and a whole team of people preparing, because it's finding the law, it's finding the right citation, it's being able to present that citation in a way that kind of fits the overall delivery. And then it's the message itself. How do you craft that message in a way that it's not misinterpreted? You're trying to reduce the potential misinterpretation. So the journey has been very all-consuming, but very rewarding, because starting from that first video that Sumaya posted where we were trending and I learned a new word, from there on, it's basically that in itself kind of fed back into this sort of excitement. So now you felt more reason to do what we started doing. And as time went on, we gathered so many followers so quickly. And the flip side of having so many followers is that they started asking questions. And now you're really starting to feel what concerns people, what worries people, what people want to know, people want to learn. And they would send us very, very much sort of real life stories and questions and concerns. And we were just a bunch of humans as well. So we get interested, we get worried for them. And so now we want to help. And our way of helping, in case somebody, for example, says they're being abused at home. And so there we go. We research the text, and we will present, okay, well, for example, domestic abuse is illegal and such and such law. So we started doing more of that, and people started complimenting and commenting and thanking us. And that kind of feeds itself. And so, and this is where we are today.
So now, looking back at your journey, do you ever think of how far you've reached? And when you think about it, do you ever feel proud?
Very proud. And I'll tell you, very proud more about being able to, in two ways. One is helping people, truly helping people. And then two, and I will perhaps should be careful about saying this, but I will still take the credit, is we're kind of transforming history, we're changing history. Because I do think through our work, we've been able to influence certain changes in the law, but at least the implementation of that law and people's understanding and knowledge of the law, and therefore giving them the tools to not be afraid to apply the law. So I do truly think that we have influenced the sort of in many ways legal reform, business reform, just the kind of the reform on the ground on the one hand, and on the other hand, people's lives. I just give you an example. I go to Global Village for the first time on my birthday recently, and there's people around me. People just say, "Listen, you're the TikTok lawyer. I just have to tell you, I want to thank you because you helped me. I turned my life around on the basis of your advice. My boss had my passport, and I didn't have money, and I didn't have my my documents. I had no job. I did not know what to do. My fines were accumulating, and I had no idea what to do. I was like a fugitive. And then I listened to your TikTok, so you listened obviously we're not just on TikTok, we're on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. I think May said we're like 15, 16 different platforms. But she said, I listened to your advice, and as a result, I was able to get my passport back. I was able to properly resign from that job and to pay off my fines. And now I'm so happy. I work for myself, got this business. Thank you so much. So these are the sort of stories. So when you ask, am I proud? These are the stories that make us proud.
Now, law is a profession which is very, very male dominated, like many other professions. Like during your work experience, do you ever feel that there was a disadvantage of being a woman in the field of law?
So two things about that. One, it depends. You say law is male dominant. It depends on where you're asking, because in the U.S., there is perhaps I would say it's maybe the other way around. It's more female dominated. So in terms of law school and law students and just lawyers in general, it's at the very least 50-50. Now, how many women end up going through the ranks and becoming partners and continuing to practice? Perhaps that ratio starts changing later on. So it's sort of like a viper comes up when somebody least expects you. So I've actually felt that it's been an advantage for me personally, but part of it, I do understand part of it is my own personality. I've never really sort of felt that sense of victimhood as a woman, and that I would attribute to my mom, who's a very strong woman. So I've just never really felt discriminated as a woman, but they also don't really allow anybody to discriminate. So there's but I do understand that there's a lot of personality driven, and not everybody has the same sort of strong personality that I do. But also, I mean, even in this environment, I've just always felt that I've never, in terms of just the business interactions, I've never felt put down or discriminated because I'm a woman, even in this sort of perhaps more male dominant, Arab world. I personally have not. And what I've done, I've built my own. If you think about it, I'm a Ukrainian, ethnically Ukrainian American white woman, doesn't speak Arabic, with no family in the Middle East. I built my own law firm, my own practice on my own.
Was there any challenges that you faced in this profession in a Middle Eastern country?
Yes, and the challenges are less about being a woman versus a man, though I do have to tell you, if you've looked us up on our website, for example, we are predominantly women.
Yeah.
And this is not by design, and we're looking for men. So please, anybody, all men out there, if you want to join the law practice in the Middle East, we're always looking for good men. But just things have evolved such that for the time being, we're mainly women. So it's less about men, women. It's more about finding the right people. And I think because the UAE is still a new country, and there's people here that come from every walks of life, and I've obviously grown up a lot and wizened up a lot and matured, and so has the country. But when I came here 15 years ago, you did not know who was who. People were just presenting themselves. They were, whoever they said they were, and people just sort of took it at face value. And the reality and it's because we're all newcomers to this place. So you could not really verify, did you really sort of care to verify? Well, if you present to be an engineer, are you actually an engineer? I mean, I still to this day remember there were lawyers after the financial crisis of 2008. There's some lawyers applying to my law firm for a law position, and I see that they were in-house lawyers, very, very senior in-house lawyers, very, very big companies in the UAE, and I'm looking at their CVs, and I'm like, where's your law degree? You don't have a law degree, and you were in-house lawyer for a very large, sort of almost like a semi-government company. So there was many examples like that. And back then, in the UAE, there was not a requirement to present your educational qualifications. Now it is, but when I came here, there wasn't. So you could be anybody, and a lot of people were basically anybody they wanted to be. So I think part of that was just finding the right person and being able to, and I'm not a distrusting person by nature. So if somebody told me I can do this, I took it at face value, and only to later realize they actually could not do that.
Yeah.
So I think perhaps the biggest challenge is finding the right people, and again, learning and all growing and maturing. But if I were to say challenge, it's that. It's been very difficult to find the right people. But the flip side of it, when you do find the right people, they're truly quite remarkable.
Law is a profession wherein there's something new every other day. Like over the years, was there any case of yours that seemed to stand out for you? Like a personal favorite or something?
There have been many, and I'd say perhaps one of the most favorite ones, most memorable to all of us as a group, is when it was in 2020, and that was shortly kind of in the wake of COVID. And I would tell you, looking back, and COVID also was a blessing in disguise, and it transformed our world in many ways for the better. And so, but one of the transformation that was happening in the UAE kind of during the COVID era is legislative reforms. There were just tremendous legislative reforms that were happening kind of almost like on a monthly basis. One of which was the amendment to the criminal law, decriminalizing, in long story short, basically out of wedlock marriages or out of wedlock babies, rather. Among other things. So any kind of out of wedlock relationships, what was previously considered the assault on honor, even with consent. So until 2020, that all of that was considered illegal. Not just illegal means it's criminal, i.e., you go to jail. So, for example, you had a baby without a marriage certificate, or if your marriage certificate was within less than 6 months, you were considered a criminal, and people were serving time in jail and then ultimately deported for giving birth without a marriage certificate. So that was until 2020, and we knew a lot of people, obviously, who had to run, or people who basically were serving time because, again, that's how the UAE had always been. And then in 2020, all of a sudden, one little small provision in the criminal law changed, and that was the assault on honor, even with consent. That even with consent was taken out. That's all it was. So that phrase in the law was taken out with even with consent. Therefore, it became assault on honor based against your will. So all of a sudden, just by taking out that one phrase, the whole law, just the law criminalizing any kind of relationships without basically the stamp of marriage, we're no longer criminal. But we represented a client at the time who had a baby out of wedlock, and so there was a police case, a criminal case filed against her. This was before the law changed, and then thankfully for her at the time, it was happening when she delivered, right as at the peak of COVID, and so during COVID they were not putting people in jail so much. So she actually did not end up going to jail because of COVID, and so she ended up spending time with her baby. But there was a criminal case against her, and there was no sort of proceeding forward, and there was, I think, and all of these criminal cases at the time had a punishment of 1 year in jail and then deportation. And so obviously during this time, you cannot leave the country because you have a criminal case. And so we represented this person who had, and in fact, and she had a very traumatic delivery. So there's a lot of sort of emotion that was involved in just going through the birth to begin with, let alone, and then the baby barely survived, let alone then obviously with, okay, now you've got a baby, but now you're a criminal. And then as she was waiting for basically the case to be moving through the system, the legal system, the law changed. And also another nuance in her particular case is that the father was unknown. So we were, perhaps I'd say we were the first ones. So we took on her case. And on the back of the new change in the law, and then there was a decree from the prosecutor, and basically stated these kinds of cases are no longer criminal. So on the back of that, we filed a request with the court to basically, first of all, we filed a request to dismiss her case from the authority, from the police, or from the criminal case, because it's no longer a crime. And we received that verdict. Basically, the judgment decision in this case has been canceled out altogether. Remember, this is a case that had carried a punishment of 1 year in jail and deportation. And all of a sudden, so we had a decree that said, yes, it's true now judgment is no more, it's invalid because the law had changed. So that was first part of it. Okay, now she was no longer criminal, very good, but the baby still is not having legal papers because you need a birth certificate. And so, on the back of these documents, we'll apply to the courts make a requesting for the court to authorize the issuance of the birth certificate for her. And I truly think we were the first ones in the UAE because we had not heard of anybody else doing this. So we applied to for the court's permission to authorize the Ministry of Health and ultimately issue birth certificate for somebody. This is one of the first ones.
Yeah.
Everywhere we went to the court, we went to the Ministry of Health, we went to the hospital, every place we went, they said, "Oh no, it's a crime. It's a crime," because it takes a while for these kinds of legislative reforms to kind of penetrate societal mindset and people to understand the law has changed. And because since the UAE had formed, the law was always what it was, which is this is criminal. So people could not believe, people did not know for the longest time. They did not believe. They were in denial. They did not want to believe. So everywhere we went, oh no, it's a crime. It's a crime. She's going to be deported. She's going to go to jail. They've been deported. And so there's a lot of education that we had to do across the board, from the hospitals to the various ministries to even the courts and the police. And so I'm thankful we had these decisions from the authorities that basically on the one hand, canceled out this criminal judgment, specifically stating this is no longer a crime because of the amendment law. So that alone. Now with that, we applied to the civil court for the request to have the birth certificate issued. But to complicate that story, because remember, what was criminal is not having a marriage certificate. But here we not had a marriage certificate. We do not know who the father was. So who do you write in the birth certificate as the other parent? And because this particular incident happened before the woman gave birth, before the law changed, when they asked her at the hospital and the police the name of the father, she was so afraid. She put some random name. But when the time came for us to request a birth certificate, the name of the person who was indicated in the birth notifications in the hospital is not the actual father. The person actually had nothing to do with anything. So we needed to amend that name, not just to amend to cross out the name. So our request to the court was truly revolutionary. Not only were we asking for permission to have a birth certificate issued for somebody who didn't have a marriage certificate, but somebody also who didn't have a known father, and also at the same time cross out the name of the previous man that was, and also onto that, and then change the name to the mother's name. And we're able to do it all. And I remember when we finally got this, and then the decision of the court, and went to the time was I think the HA, the Dubai Health Authority, the issue as birth certificate. I mean, the woman cried. You gave me birth. You gave birth to basically a new life because now her baby was legal. And at that time, her baby had already been 1 year old. And if you don't have a birth certificate, you have to understand the person does not have legal existence. So you cannot go to the doctor because who is this person? Who is this baby? You cannot have insurance, right? So you can't leave the country. So you can't really, you just truly just have this person that has zero legal identity. And so I remember when we gave her the birth certificate, it was truly very emotional. So I'd say this is one case that absolutely is stuck in all of our memories forever. And that probably, I'd say, one of our greatest accomplishments.
What was the hardest case that you ever fought as a lawyer?
Our hardest case, we had many. I would say maybe there are two that are most notable ones. One, it was a commercial dispute where I represented a group of investors from 2006 era who had invested a fairly significant amount of money here in real estate, and with a very prominent developer with very prominent connections. I would state it that way. So prominent connections, and therefore somewhat sensitive and delicate in terms of an entity to kind of to become a fight with. And I remember this client came to me in 2008 when I moved here, and we tried every possible route. We went through like diplomatic channels to try to settle this dispute for years, and through various government channels. And we wrote all sorts of fancy legal notices and just basically trying to request the refund of the investment. And nothing was working. So this was for years it went on. And then finally, I think it must have been 6 or 7 years into this dispute that we finally decided, okay, let's file a court case. And then also because the court case involved actually going after an entity that was related to sort of like almost a semi-government entity. And at the time in particular, we were afraid, well, if it's a government or semi-government entity, you cannot touch it. Well, but as the rulers of this country have always said, is the law, nobody's above the law. Yeah. So it's like the law applies equally to all, whether it's a government, semi-government entity. And so said, listen, let's just rely on the law, follow the law, and see what happens. And I remember the court of first instance was too afraid to touch it, so we actually lost because I think I think they were too afraid to touch the entity that we dealt with. And then we on the court of appeals we won, and the court of cassation we won again. And then we even went for enforcement, and we were seizing plots of land, and so it was a truly remarkable story, especially because of the history of the time that it took for us to actually have a result, and because of the sensitivities that were involved. So, and also that was another kind of evolution and less of a lesson, but more kind of a reminder or highlight that it doesn't matter that who that entity on the other side is. As long as you're following the law and you're sticking within the boundaries of the law, in theory at least, and we've seen it in practice, nobody should be above the law. So you have legitimate legal arguments, that in of itself should not, should basically give you confidence that you should at least, at the very least, try your chances in court. So that was one case. The other one is similar, is slightly different, but basically also a group of investors would invested in another sort of with an entity, and their money just went missing. And at the time, because they had invested at the time when there wasn't this sort of documentation and paperwork involved, and so there wasn't much documents that they could rely on, and it was fairly significant amounts of money. And every lawyer they had gone to before they came to us for years, I think for 5 or 6 years, they were shopping this case around, trying to find a law firm to represent. And every lawyer that they had approached them said, listen, you don't need documents. So therefore, do you have bank transfer? You don't have bank transfer because everything was done in cash at the time. So said, this case is a non-starter. They came to us and said, well, I think we can. I mean, this because the law allowed for different types of evidence, presenting different types of evidence other than, for example, just the bank transfers, including emails. But at the time, believe it or not, I know you're young, you're quite young, but I'll tell you, this is in my time, and I know I'm very young as well. But it was not so long ago that one of the arguments that lawyers would use here, this is by email, and the email is not admissible evidence because it's not an original document. Therefore, you cannot accept the email. This was not that long ago. And these are the kind of arguments that people were using. Well, there is no actual, if it doesn't have an original, it doesn't have an actual stamp, therefore it's not evidence. So that was another case where, well, we took that case on, and ultimately we won on the basis of, and I remember the lawyers, they were arguing, oh, no, this emails, these confirmations by emails, these are not original documents, they're not admissible, they're fraudulent. And we cited the law. Now the law states that this evidence is also evidence. So that case we also won as also a sweet ending to the case, especially because of the journey that these clients have gone through.
Now, I've heard that law school is very tough to get through. So what were some of the tips and tricks that helped you get through your law school?
I think people, obviously, it always comes down to people and professors. So you want to find professors with whom you can engage that actually make it interesting. So I'd say my advice to all those who are thinking of studying law, choose less about the subject, let it be less about the subject, more about the professor who's teaching you, because if it's a professor who can engage you, it can solicit interest in the subject. And if you have interest in the subject, then you can learn better. And if you can learn better, you can do better. And that's also what makes it for a more rewarding and meaningful experience. So I would say choose your professors well, professors, less about the subject, professors, and obviously people that you study with, your classmates, because they also make a difference. And I made a lot of great connections in my law school of international students coming all over the world, and we're still keeping in touch. And ironically enough, it's coming full circle. I just had two days ago. I had actually one of my old law school friends from France, who I met at the University of Texas, actually now come to me and retain our firm for advice for his client. So it's these kind of connections continue to come together. So I'd say those are perhaps choose your professors well, and make the most of the student population that you have in law school, because once you're working, the social pool of people shrinks. I hope this was insightful, and I hope this was insightful and interesting for all of you watching from the comfort of your home. Don't forget to follow, and don't forget to subscribe.